15 million years ago, the world belonged to apes. Forests stretched across three continents, forming continuous canopies so vast that an ape could have traveled from equatorial Africa toward the edge of what is now the Arctic Circle without ever touching the ground. Today, fewer than 300,000 chimpanzees remain in the wild, fewer than 800 mountain gorillas. The combined population of every non human ape alive today could fit inside a single mid sized city. It was not always this way. At their peak, as many as 100 species of apes lived on Earth at the same time. Scientists call this chapter of Earth's history the Miocene. Apes ranged far beyond Africa. They lived across Spain, France, Hungary, Greece, Turkey, India, Pakistan, China, and much of eastern Africa. For millions of years, they outnumbered monkeys in the fossil record, the complete opposite of the world we know today. One species grew to more than 10 feet tall and weighed over 1,200 pounds, becoming the largest primate ever to live. Another, living on an ancient Mediterranean island, may have been walking upright millions of years before any known human ancestor. Some scientists now believe the ancestors of chimpanzees and gorillas may not have originated in Africa at all. They may have first evolved in Europe before returning south when their world began to disappear. Then, almost all of them were gone. A planet that once supported around 100 species of apes was reduced to fewer than 20. And the story of how that happened is also the story of how our own lineage survived when so many others did not. Today, we're going back to the Miocene to uncover how apes spread across three continents, why they became one of the greatest evolutionary success stories in Earth's history, and what brought their empire to an end. Before we go in, drop a comment. Are you here to fall asleep to this, or here purely for the knowledge? Let's begin. Picture the world at the opening of the Miocene, beginning around 23 million years ago and continuing until about 5.3 million years ago. This first chapter of the Neogene period unfolded across a planet shaped by warmth, rich forests, and flourishing mammals. Many familiar animal groups either appeared for the first time or expanded into new forms during these millions of years. Early horses crossed woodland clearings, elephants developed along branching family lines, primitive dogs and bears spread into fresh habitats, while saber-toothed cats and early hyenas joined an increasingly varied community. Among this abundance, one branch of life rose higher than all the rest. The fossil record preserves that story with remarkable consistency. Layer after layer reveals an age defined above all by apes. Paleontologists have long referred to the Miocene as the Age of the Apes, a description grounded in evidence gathered from countless discoveries across multiple continents. During these millions of years, apes reached a diversity unmatched before or since. They occupied forests that stretched across enormous distances, leaving behind bones, teeth, and fragments of ancient lives that now reveal an extraordinary chapter in primate history. Such expansion became possible because the planet itself offered conditions unlike those of the present day. Atmospheric carbon dioxide remained much higher than modern levels, helping sustain a warmer global climate. Polar ice covered only limited regions, and broad belts of subtropical forest extended from equatorial Africa into much of Europe. Dense canopies connected landscapes that today belong to different climates entirely. Fruit remained available through much of the year, supporting animals that depended on reliable forest harvests. Open grasslands occupied only a small share of the landscape, leaving uninterrupted woodland as the dominant setting for countless generations. Within those forests lived creatures possessing a distinctive collection of traits. The most obvious difference separated them from monkeys at a glance. Apes lacked tails, a feature reflecting deeper anatomical changes throughout the body. Their brains were generally larger in proportion to body size, supporting increasingly flexible behavior. Growth unfolded at an unhurried pace, with longer childhoods, fewer offspring, and extended lifespans. Their shoulders, arms, and hands retained greater freedom of movement, allowing a wide range of climbing styles and feeding strategies instead of specializing in only one pattern. Evidence from the earliest Miocene deposits in Africa reveals an unexpected balance among primates. Apes appear in impressive variety, represented by numerous forms occupying different ecological roles. Monkeys, by comparison, remained uncommon and belonged primarily to a single family. Anyone walking beneath those forest crowns would have encountered a primate world almost opposite to the one familiar today, where monkeys greatly outnumber their larger relatives across much of Africa and Asia. Every surviving ape traces its ancestry into this remarkable interval. Gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans all descend from branches that expanded during the Miocene radiation. The forests that covered much of the ancient world became the setting where those shared ancestors lived, adapted, and diversified. Our own story does not begin with cities, tools, or language. It begins here, among branches lifted toward warm skies, where the foundations of every living ape lineage first took lasting shape. Before apes wandered across distant continents, their entire history unfolded within a world surrounded by water. Early Miocene Africa stood apart from Eurasia, separated by the broad waters of the Tethys Sea, an immense shallow ocean reaching from the Atlantic Ocean toward lands that would one day become the Middle East. The continent functioned like a great island, and for millions of years, its wildlife evolved with little opportunity to leave. Isolation became a patient architect, shaping lineages through countless generations, while the forests of Africa sheltered an expanding family unlike any the planet had known before. Within those forests, ape diversity flourished in extraordinary ways. Fossil discoveries from deposits dating between roughly 22 million and 17 million years ago reveal at least 14 distinct ape genera living across Africa alone. That number exceeds the variety of living ape genera found anywhere on Earth today. Each discovery adds another thread to a growing picture of forests filled with different body sizes, feeding habits, and climbing styles, all sharing the same continent while exploring separate paths through evolution. Among the best known inhabitants was Proconsul, uncovered in Kenya and Uganda from rocks dating between about 23 million and 14 million years ago. Different species ranged from the size of a small monkey to nearly the size of a modern female gorilla. Although Proconsul lacked a tail, confirming its place among the apes, its movement still reflected an older pattern. It traveled along the tops of branches using all four limbs, more like a monkey than the branch hanging specialists that would appear much later. Its face carried a relatively long snout, preserving features inherited from earlier primates, even as other characteristics pointed toward a different future. The skull of Proconsul also tells another important story. Compared with monkeys living during the same period, its brain was larger relative to body mass. This gradual increase did not transform behavior overnight, yet it reflected an evolutionary direction that would continue through later ape history. The forests of early Miocene Africa were already nurturing animals with growing behavioral flexibility, capable of responding to changing food sources and complex woodland environments. Another resident, Afropithecus, appeared around 17 million years ago in what is now Kenya. Fossil teeth and jawbones reveal an ape developing at a slower pace than monkeys, extending growth over a longer portion of life. This pattern resembles the prolonged childhood seen in living apes, where learning and development unfold across many years. Such evidence marks one of the earliest known examples of this distinctive life history strategy taking shape within the ape family. These forests supported far more than a single way of living. Some apes specialized in ripe fruit, selecting seasonal harvests high in the canopy. Others relied more heavily on leaves, while certain species possessed strong jaws and thick tooth enamel suited for cracking harder foods. Multiple forms occupied the same landscapes without competing directly, each finding its own place among branches, trunks, and forest clearings. Diversity arose through countless small adjustments, repeated across immense spans of time. For millions of years, this rich evolutionary world remained bounded by surrounding seas. Africa served as both cradle and home for its apes, protecting their development while limiting their reach. Beyond the coastline, other continents held forests of their own, though none yet sheltered these primates. Their story belonged entirely to Africa, waiting within an island continent whose natural barriers preserved one of evolution's most remarkable chapters. Change sometimes begins with movements too gradual for any living creature to notice. Deep beneath the surface, immense plates of Earth's crust pressed against one another across millions of years, reshaping coastlines, lifting mountain ranges, and closing seas that had separated continents since long before the first ape appeared. Around 19 million years ago, the African Arabian plate collided with Eurasia. As the Zagros Mountains rose, the final marine connection between the Tethys Sea and the Indian Ocean disappeared, replacing water with an emerging corridor of land. A gradual fall in global sea levels strengthened this new connection. Land that had rested beneath shallow seas became passable ground, forming what paleontologists call the Gomphotherium Land Bridge. For the first time in countless generations, Africa and Eurasia were joined by a natural route wide enough for large mammals to travel. The barrier that had shaped African evolution for so long no longer stood as an unbroken boundary. The movement that followed unfolded across many species at once. Early elephants wandered into unfamiliar valleys. Rodents spread through new woodlands. Pigs, antelopes, and aardvarks expanded beyond their former limits, each carrying its own evolutionary history into landscapes untouched by their presence. Among these travelers were the apes, leaving the continent where their lineage had grown in remarkable diversity. Their departure marked one of the most influential migrations in primate history, though no creature crossing that corridor could have sensed its future significance. Evidence of this expansion appears soon afterward in the fossil record of Eurasia. Shortly after about 17 million years ago, fossils of Gryptopithecus emerged in what are now Germany and Turkey. This early Eurasian ape demonstrates that members of the ape family had already established themselves far beyond Africa. The forests awaiting them provided familiar opportunities, with abundant trees, dependable food sources, and climates well suited to animals already adapted to life among branches. New discoveries continue refining this remarkable journey. In 2026, paleontologists described a fossil ape named Masropithecus maugransis from northern Egypt, dating between about 18 million and 17 million years ago. Its location suggests that the route leading out of Africa may have extended through North Africa as well as across Arabia. The crossing appears less like a single narrow passage and more like a broad gateway offering multiple paths toward Eurasia, expanding the possibilities for how these migrations unfolded. The importance of this corridor reaches far beyond one extinct species. Every living ape lineage traces its ancestry through populations that ultimately cross this connection between continents. Gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans all descend from ancestors whose descendants dispersed beyond Africa during this interval. The Gomphotherium land bridge therefore stands as one of the most consequential landscapes in the entire history of primates, linking separate worlds into a single evolutionary stage. Across Eurasia, forests stretched over immense regions warmed by favorable climates and sustained by dependable rainfall. These woodlands presented opportunities unlike anything available within an isolated continent alone. Apes entered habitats ready to support expansion, diversification, and adaptation across an astonishing geographic range. A geological transformation had redrawn the map of the world, opening pathways that allowed one remarkable branch of life to spread farther than it ever had before. The new pathways did more than connect land. They unlocked possibilities that had remained closed for millions of years. Beginning around 17 million years ago, ape populations expanded outward with surprising speed, following forests that stretched across Eurasia like broad ribbons of living green. Within only a few million years, their descendants occupied landscapes separated by thousands of miles, establishing one of the greatest primate expansions ever recorded in the fossil record. The Europe they entered would appear unfamiliar to modern eyes. Much of the continent enjoyed a warm subtropical climate, where dense woodlands covered hills and valleys that are now vineyards, grasslands, and cities. Rhinoceroses browsed among thick vegetation. Forest giraffes moved between towering trees with long, careful strides. Flying squirrels glided through the canopy after dusk, while saber-toothed predators patrolled the forest floor. Above that bustling community, apes found an environment rich with fruit, shelter, and countless opportunities to diversify. Evidence of their success appears across an astonishing geographic range. Fossils have been uncovered in what are now Spain, France, Hungary, Turkey, Greece, Germany, Austria, India, Pakistan, and China. Each discovery represents another population adapting to local conditions while remaining part of the same remarkable evolutionary radiation. Together, these sites reveal that apes occupied much of the Old World, spreading across 3 continents with a reach unmatched by any earlier members of their family. As discoveries accumulated over many decades, paleontologists recognized the true scale of this flourishing. The Miocene fossil record preserves as many as 100 ape species distributed among more than 20 genera. Even that impressive total is almost certainly incomplete, since fossilization favors only a tiny fraction of living creatures. Entire populations disappeared without leaving any trace, suggesting that the true diversity may have been even greater than the rocks can reveal today. This thriving community stood in striking contrast to the position of monkeys during the same interval. Fossils show that monkeys remained comparatively uncommon and were represented primarily by a single extinct family known as Victoriopithecidae. Their distribution stayed largely centered in Africa, while ape lineages expanded across forests, stretching from Western Europe to Eastern Asia. For this chapter of Earth's history, apes occupied ecological roles that monkeys would inherit only much later. The comparison with the present day reveals how completely the balance has shifted. Modern Africa and Asia support well over 130 species of Old World monkeys, while fewer than 20 non-human ape species remain alive. During the Miocene, those proportions were almost exactly reversed. Anyone wandering through those forests would have expected to encounter an ape far more readily than a monkey. an idea that feels almost impossible when viewed through the lens of today's world. Each newly occupied region encouraged fresh evolutionary experiments. Some ape populations became larger, others remained compact. Diets broadened according to local forests, and body forms gradually reflected different climbing styles, feeding habits, and social lives. Natural selection explored many solutions at once, producing an extraordinary variety without following a single pattern. The Miocene became an age of innovation, where apes filled branches across three continents and flourished with a diversity that has never been matched again in the long history of primates. While ape populations flourished across newly reached continents, Africa continued shaping its own remarkable cast of inhabitants. The homeland that had first nurtured these primates did not become stagnant after their expansion abroad. During the Middle Miocene, fresh lineages appeared, older ones changed, and forests across eastern Africa supported an extraordinary collection of species living side by side. Evolution unfolded in many directions at once, producing forms that explored different ways of surviving within the same broad landscape. One of the most significant discoveries from this period is Kenyapithecus, known from Kenya and dating to roughly 14 million years ago. At first glance, its teeth appear unremarkable, yet they preserve one of the clearest signs of changing adaptation. Their enamel had become noticeably thicker than that of many earlier apes, allowing greater resistance against hard foods such as seeds, nuts, or other durable plant material. This change suggests an animal capable of widening its diet whenever preferred fruits became less dependable. Flexibility had begun to enter the evolutionary picture in subtle but meaningful ways. Another important resident was Nacolopithecus, preserved in unusually complete remains from deposits about 15 million years old. Its skeleton combines older anatomical traits with features pointing toward new styles of movement. The arms still reflect life among branches, yet the shoulders, spine, and limbs also indicate increasing confidence while traveling across larger supports and spending more time above solid ground. These adjustments did not represent a departure from forest life. They reveal an ape experimenting with broader possibilities while remaining deeply connected to wooded habitats. Evidence preserved within the teeth of Afropithecus turkinensis offers an even more intimate glimpse into daily existence. Chemical studies examining stable isotopes locked inside fossil enamel reveal repeated seasonal shifts experienced during the animal's lifetime. Around 17 million years ago, this ape already lived through recurring dry periods that altered food availability from one season to another. Such records transform fossil teeth into lasting archives of ancient climates, preserving traces of rainfall and vegetation long after the forests themselves disappeared. The richness of these ecosystems becomes especially clear in certain fossil sites across Kenya. Some layers of ancient soil contain remains from as many as 6 different primate species living within the same environment. Instead of competing directly for identical resources, each occupied its own ecological role. One favored fruit high in the canopy, another relied more heavily on leaves. Others searched for tougher foods or traveled through different levels of the forest. Together, they formed communities whose complexity rivals that of modern monkey assemblages, although the dominant residents were apes. Body size varied just as widely as feeding habits. Smaller species navigated slender branches with ease, while larger relatives relied upon stronger supports capable of carrying greater weight. Differences in limb proportions, teeth, jaws, and posture reflected millions of years of adaptation to specific lifestyles. Evolution repeatedly tested new combinations, refining successful traits while producing entirely different solutions in neighboring populations. Seen together, these African apes reveal a continent functioning as an immense natural laboratory. They were connected by shared ancestry, yet each lineage followed its own path through changing forests and shifting seasons. Their diversity extended far beyond outward appearance, reaching into growth, diet, movement, and behavior. The Middle Miocene preserved no single blueprint for becoming an ape. It preserved countless experiments unfolding together, each contributing another chapter to one of Earth's richest evolutionary radiations. Across southern and central Europe, the forests had become home rather than frontier. Between about 16 million and 13 million years ago, ape populations settled into landscapes that supported them for immense stretches of time. Fossils recovered from Spain's Catalonia region, France, Hungary, and Austria reveal communities that were neither temporary visitors nor isolated wanderers. These primates established enduring populations, adapting to European woodlands with impressive success, while continuing the evolutionary story that had begun far to the south. Scientists group many of these European forms under the name Dryopithecines. Far from representing primitive offshoots, they possessed advanced characteristics that place them among the most accomplished apes of the Miocene. Their brains were relatively large, their bodies reflected increasingly specialized climbing abilities, and their life history closely resembled that of living great apes. They matured gradually, invested heavily in each offspring, and likely lived longer lives than many other mammals sharing their forests. Such traits point toward complex social behavior developing alongside physical adaptation. One of the best known members of this remarkable group is Dryopithecus, whose name means the oak ape. Fossils discovered across several European countries reveal an animal roughly comparable in size to a modern chimpanzee. Its skeleton suggests an agile climber, comfortable navigating high branches where fruit remained abundant through much of the growing season. Growth proceeded at a measured pace, with extended juvenile development before adulthood. This prolonged period of maturation echoes the developmental pattern preserved among surviving great apes today, linking distant relatives through shared biology separated by millions of years. The body of Dryopithecus also displays an important anatomical trend. Its torso shows evidence of becoming more upright, with proportions differing from earlier apes that moved mainly above branches on all four limbs. This orthograde posture, characterized by a vertical trunk during climbing and suspension, represents an important stage in the body plan eventually shared by gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and humans. The transformation unfolded gradually, one skeletal adjustment building upon another across countless generations. Spain later yielded one of the most informative fossil discoveries ever made. Pyrrholopithecus catalonicus, dating to roughly 12 million years ago, is represented by more than 80 preserved bones. Such completeness offers an unusually detailed picture of its anatomy. The chest appears broad and relatively shallow, closely resembling the upper body proportions of living great apes. Strong shoulders and a stable torso indicate increasing versatility while climbing, reaching, and supporting body weight among substantial branches. Its name honors the Catalan region where it was uncovered, preserving a connection between the fossil and the landscape that sheltered it for millions of years. Farther east, another important ape emerged from Hungary. Rudopithecus, living around 10 million years ago, possessed several skull features strikingly similar to those of modern African great apes. Its frontal sinus, pronounced brow ridges, and downward curving face resemble structures later seen in gorillas and chimpanzees. These similarities have made Rudopithecus central to continuing scientific discussions about the ancestry of living ape lineages. Taken together, the European apes reveal a continent rich in evolutionary creativity. Their forests supported animals, refining body structures, developmental strategies, and movement patterns that would shape later branches of the ape family. Europe became far more than an extension of earlier migrations. It emerged as a place where some of the most advanced ape forms known from the Miocene reached their fullest expression. Far to the east, another branch of the ape family was following its own path through changing forests. Asia did not merely receive migrants from earlier expansions. It became a landscape where distinct lineages diversified, adapting to environments that stretched from the foothills of the Himalayas to the forests of what are now China and Southeast Asia. Among these populations emerged the ancestors of the only surviving great apes still native to Asia today, the orangutans, alongside the broader evolutionary story that eventually included the gibbons. One of the most celebrated fossils from this region belongs to Sivapithecus, discovered in the Siwalik Hills spanning present-day India and Pakistan. Known to science since the 1870s, this ape has become central to understanding Asian primate evolution. Its skull preserves an unmistakable resemblance to the modern orangutan. The face curves inward with a distinctive concave profile. The eyes sit within oval-shaped sockets, separated by a relatively narrow space, while other facial proportions closely mirror those of the living forest dwellers of Borneo and Sumatra. These similarities have convinced many researchers that Sivapithecus belongs near the ancestry of the orangutan lineage. Its life history also reflects patterns already familiar among modern great apes. Growth unfolded gradually across an extended childhood, allowing time for prolonged learning before adulthood. Individuals likely lived comparatively long lives while producing relatively few offspring. Fossils dating to around 12 million years ago demonstrate that this slow developmental strategy had already become deeply established. It was a successful approach in forests, capable of providing dependable food across many seasons. The story broadens farther east with Lufeng pithecus from southwestern China and Korat pithecus from Thailand. These later Miocene apes display characteristics linking them to the same broader orangutan branch, suggesting that this lineage spread widely across eastern and southeastern Asia. Their presence reveals forests connected across enormous distances, supporting related populations that adapted to local conditions while retaining shared anatomical traits inherited from common ancestors. Not every fossil fits neatly into the growing family tree. Oncorapithecus, known from what is now Turkey and dating to about 10 million years ago, continues to challenge researchers. Its skeleton and skull combine primitive characteristics with more advanced features, making its precise evolutionary position difficult to determine. Some traits resemble those seen in orangutan relatives, while others hint at different relationships. Each newly studied specimen adds another piece to a puzzle that remains incomplete despite decades of careful investigation. Across Asia, environmental conditions were beginning to shift. Seasonal weather patterns strengthened as monsoon systems became more pronounced. Forests no longer formed uninterrupted expanses in every region. Woodlands broke into patches, fruiting seasons became less predictable, and periods of scarcity grew more common. Animals relying upon stable supplies of high-quality food faced increasing pressure to adjust their behavior and diet without abandoning the slow pace of growth that had defined ape evolution for millions of years. These Asian apes stood at an important crossroads, Their bodies carried the inheritance of an earlier world shaped by abundant forests, while their daily lives unfolded within habitats becoming steadily more variable. Some lineages endured these changes and ultimately gave rise to the orangutans that still inhabit Southeast Asia today. Others disappeared, leaving only scattered fossils that preserve the memory of a remarkable radiation stretching across the eastern reaches of the Miocene world. Among all the branches that emerged from the flourishing ape world, one grew beyond every expectation. Its story survives through only a handful of fossils, yet those fragments hint at an animal unlike anything living today. Gigantopithecus occupies a place entirely its own, representing the greatest size ever achieved by any known primate. Although much of its skeleton remains undiscovered, the pieces that have endured carry enough evidence to reveal an astonishing giant. Most of what scientists know comes from isolated teeth and portions of the lower jaw. At first glance, such remains seem frustratingly incomplete, yet teeth preserve remarkable information. Their dimensions, thickness, and wear patterns reveal diet, body proportions, and relationships with other species. In the case of Gigantopithecus, every recovered tooth is immense. The jaws supporting those teeth are equally massive, allowing researchers to estimate an animal that likely stood more than 10 feet tall and weighed as much as 1,200 pounds. That is roughly 3 times the weight of a modern gorilla, making it the largest primate ever known. Gigantopithecus belonged to the broader Civipithecine branch, the same Asian lineage associated with the ancestry of modern orangutans. It first appeared during the late Miocene and endured far longer than many other ancient ape groups, surviving into the Pleistocene. While countless relatives vanished as climates shifted and forests changed, this enormous ape continued inhabiting parts of southern China and nearby regions for millions of additional years. Its remarkable size depended upon an equally remarkable diet. Chemical evidence preserved within fossil teeth, together with patterns of wear, indicates that Gigantopithecus relied heavily upon bamboo and other tough vegetation. Powerful jaws and exceptionally thick enamel allowed repeated grinding of coarse plant material that many other apes could not process efficiently. In ecological terms, its role closely resembles that occupied today by the giant panda, although achieved by an ape many times larger than any living primate. This specialized lifestyle carried hidden costs. Bamboo forests can support enormous herbivores when conditions remain stable, yet dependence upon a narrow range of foods leaves little room for adjustment when habitats begin changing. As climates became more seasonal and forests fragmented, reliable supplies of favored plants likely became increasingly uneven across the landscape. A body requiring tremendous amounts of food each day would have struggled whenever those resources declined. One detail lends this story an extraordinary sense of connection across time. Gigantopithecus survived long enough to share parts of Asia with Homo erectus. The largest ape that ever lived may have occupied the same forests visited by one of our own early human relatives. Whether these species ever encountered one another remains unknown, yet their timelines overlap closely enough that such meetings cannot be dismissed. For a brief chapter of Earth's history, giant apes and ancient humans walked through neighboring woodlands. The disappearance of Gigantopithecus remains an active subject of scientific debate. Shrinking forests, increasing dependence upon specialized foods, competition for resources, or several pressures acting together may all have contributed to its extinction during the early Pleistocene. Whatever combination proved decisive, immense size offered no lasting protection. Gigantopithecus became the final representative of one of the grandest experiments born from the Miocene age of apes, leaving behind only enormous teeth and enduring questions carved into stone. Evolution sometimes conducts its most unusual experiments on islands. Separated from neighboring continents, isolated populations often follow paths found nowhere else, responding to unique surroundings with unexpected anatomical changes. During the late Miocene, one such experiment unfolded on a large Mediterranean island that would eventually become part of modern Italy. There lived Oreopithecus bambolii, one of the most distinctive apes ever uncovered from the fossil record. Fossils discovered in Tuscany and Sardinia place this remarkable ape between about 9 million and 7 million years ago. At that time, shifting coastlines left much of what is now Tuscany isolated from mainland Europe by surrounding waters. For at least 2 million years, Oreopithecus occupied this island environment with little contact from outside populations. Such prolonged isolation created conditions where evolution could proceed along an uncommon path, producing characteristics rarely seen elsewhere among ancient apes. Its skeleton has fascinated paleontologists for generations because several features appear strikingly unusual. Some researchers propose that Oreopithecus regularly adopted an upright posture while moving through branches. Instead of traveling exclusively on all four limbs or hanging beneath branches, it may have balanced on two legs across sturdy supports within the forest canopy. This interpretation remains one of the most debated ideas in primate evolution, largely because no other ape from this period displays quite the same combination of anatomical traits. Its hands provide one important clue. Certain analyses suggest that the fingers and thumb allowed an especially refined precision grip resembling capabilities later seen in humans. Such dexterity would have offered advantages while grasping branches, manipulating food, or maintaining balance among uneven supports. Although these similarities do not imply close relationship with humans, they demonstrate how comparable solutions can emerge independently when different species face similar mechanical challenges. The lower back adds another intriguing detail. Oreopithecus possessed relatively short lumbar vertebrae, a feature associated with upright-bodied apes and humans rather than animals moving primarily on all four limbs. Some researchers also interpret the pelvis as showing adaptations consistent with habitual upright posture. Together, these characteristics have encouraged the view that this island ape explored forms of locomotion unlike those of its closest relatives. Other specialists reach different conclusions after examining the same fossils. They argue that Oreopithecus remained primarily a suspensory climber, spending much of its time hanging beneath branches while using powerful arms to navigate the canopy. According to this interpretation, several unusual skeletal features reflect specialized climbing rather than true bipedal movement. The available evidence continues, supporting more than one explanation, ensuring that Oreopithecus remains one of the most actively discussed apes in paleontology. Despite ongoing debate over exactly how it moved, one conclusion enjoys broad agreement. Oreopithecus developed its distinctive anatomy independently from the lineage leading toward humans. If upright movement truly formed part of its behavior, it represents a remarkable example of parallel evolution where similar body plans arise separately in unrelated branches through comparable environmental pressures rather than shared ancestry. Its isolated world eventually disappeared. Changes in Mediterranean sea levels reconnected the island to the mainland, opening pathways for predators that had long been absent. An ecosystem shaped through millions of years of separation changed within a comparatively brief geological interval. Oreopithecus vanished soon afterward, leaving behind an extraordinary collection of fossils that preserve one of evolution's most imaginative experiments, an ape unlike any other, living on an island, perhaps walking upright long before the human story had truly begun. Every thriving ecosystem is shaped by conditions far larger than the creatures living within it. Forests, rivers, mountain ranges, and oceans all respond to forces unfolding across the entire planet. The remarkable spread of Miocene apes depended upon such forces, because the Earth they inhabited differed profoundly from the one familiar today. Their success grew from a climate that encouraged forests to flourish across regions now occupied by very different landscapes. During the early and middle Miocene, the planet experienced one of the warmest intervals of the past 35 million years. Atmospheric carbon dioxide remained substantially higher than modern levels, helping maintain global temperatures roughly 4 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than present averages. Polar ice existed only in limited amounts, allowing more heat to circulate across the globe. These conditions influenced rainfall, ocean circulation, and the distribution of vegetation on an immense scale. The response from the natural world was extraordinary. Forests expanded far beyond their modern boundaries, reaching across latitudes where broad woodlands no longer survive today. Areas now associated with cooler climates supported rich subtropical vegetation capable of sustaining large fruit-eating mammals throughout much of the year. Apes inhabiting France, Germany, and Hungary were not confined to isolated pockets of suitable habitat. They occupied forests that represented ordinary conditions for that chapter of Earth's history, extending across enormous portions of Eurasia without the interruptions familiar in the modern landscape. The arrangement of seas also played a vital role in shaping these environments. The Mediterranean basin remained connected differently to surrounding waters, while the remaining reaches of the Tethys Sea continued influencing atmospheric circulation across Eurasia. Moisture traveled inland with greater consistency, feeding forests over broad regions and supporting ecosystems that relied upon dependable rainfall. Climate, geography, and vegetation reinforced one another, creating conditions favorable for extensive woodland communities across multiple continents. Farther south, Africa was undergoing changes of its own. The East African Rift System had begun opening across the continent through volcanic activity and gradual crustal movement. Long valleys and rising highlands slowly altered the landscape, although their greatest environmental consequences still lay well in the future. During this stage, forests continued covering much of eastern Africa, providing stable habitats where ape diversity remained exceptionally high even as geological forces reshaped the land beneath them. Planetary systems, however, never remain unchanged forever. Around 15 million years ago, a gradual cooling trend known as the Middle Miocene climatic transition began altering global conditions. Temperatures slowly declined across succeeding millions of years. Around 13 million years ago, extensive ice sheets developed over West Antarctica, reflecting increasing amounts of sunlight back into space and reinforcing the cooling process already underway. The transformation unfolded across immense spans of time, measured not in lifetimes but in countless generations. Forests responded with equal patience. Their retreat did not occur everywhere at once, nor did every woodland disappear together. Some regions remained lush, while others became increasingly seasonal. Boundaries between forests and more open habitats shifted little by little, advancing across continents almost too gradually to notice within any single generation. Yet, Over millions of years, those small adjustments accumulated into sweeping ecological change. The world that had once favored widespread ape diversity began narrowing its opportunities. The broad green belt supporting populations across three continents no longer expanded as before. Its outer edges slowly withdrew, reshaping the stage upon which ape evolution had flourished for so long, guided by the same planetary forces that had first made their remarkable age possible. No boundary marked the beginning of the Great Change. There was no single season when forests failed, no morning when the planet awakened transformed. The shift unfolded with remarkable patience, advancing across millions of years until landscapes that had long favored apes gradually became places where their familiar way of life grew harder to sustain. Around 14 million years ago, Earth entered what paleoclimatologists call the Middle Miocene climatic transition. It was neither abrupt nor catastrophic in the ordinary sense. Instead, global temperatures drifted steadily downward through an immense span of time. The cooling reached every continent in different ways, altering rainfall, changing growing seasons, and slowly reshaping the forests that had supported extraordinary ape diversity across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Several powerful geological processes worked together to produce this transformation. The Himalayas continued rising as continental plates pressed relentlessly together. The Alps also gained elevation, while eastern Africa experienced further uplift as the Great Rift System developed across the continent. These growing mountain ranges redirected winds, influenced regional rainfall, and changed the movement of moisture through the atmosphere. At the same time, shifting continental positions altered ocean circulation, redistributing heat across the globe in new patterns. Far to the south, another change strengthened the cooling trend. The East Antarctic ice sheet became firmly established once again, covering vast portions of the continent with expanding ice. Bright ice reflected increasing amounts of sunlight back into space instead of allowing darker land and ocean surfaces to absorb that energy. Each advance reinforced the next, encouraging temperatures to continue their gradual decline across succeeding millions of years. Forests answered these changes with equal patience. Their retreat unfolded unevenly, with some regions remaining richly wooded, while others experienced longer dry seasons and increasing seasonal contrast. Dense canopies slowly fragmented into smaller patches separated by more open habitats. Fruit became less dependable in many places, while vegetation adapted to shifting patterns of rainfall. The direction of change remained consistent, even though its pace varied from one landscape to another. Not every primate faced these conditions with equal success. Monkeys possessed several advantages that proved increasingly valuable as forests contracted. Many reproduced more quickly, matured sooner, and could recover from population losses faster than apes. Their diets also tended to be more flexible, allowing them to consume leaves, seeds, and other lower quality foods when preferred resources became scarce. These characteristics helped many monkey lineages expand, while ape populations gradually declined across portions of their former range. The fossil record preserves this transition with remarkable clarity. Earlier deposits often contain abundant ape remains and comparatively few monkeys. Younger deposits reveal a different balance. Monkey fossils become increasingly common, while ape fossils appear less frequently. The reversal happened gradually, generation after generation, until the pattern familiar today began taking shape. Atmospheric carbon dioxide continued declining between roughly 7 million and 5.4 million years ago, bringing another profound ecological shift. Bluegrasses, using a highly efficient form of photosynthesis, expanded across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Savannas and grasslands spread where continuous tropical forests had once dominated, steadily reducing the broad woodland networks upon which so many ape species depended. The world that had supported nearly 100 known ape species was not undone by a single disaster. It was reshaped by a persistent planetary trend, one season and one generation at a time, until an age of extraordinary abundance slowly yielded to a different Earth. The turning point did not arrive with fire, flood, or sudden violence. It unfolded through changing seasons that gradually favored different kinds of forests and different kinds of animals. Around 9.6 million years ago, paleontologists recognize one of the defining biological transitions of the Miocene in Europe, an event now known as the Valesian crisis. Within a comparatively brief interval of geological time, ecosystems that had flourished for millions of years began giving way to communities shaped by a cooler and more seasonal climate. Its name comes from the Valles Penedès basin in northeastern Spain, where an unusually complete sequence of fossil deposits preserves this transformation in remarkable detail. Layer by layer, the rocks document a living world before the transition and another that emerged afterward. Few places reveal the changing fortunes of Miocene mammals with such extraordinary clarity, making the basin one of the most valuable windows into this chapter of Earth's history. Before the crisis, the forests of Spain supported astonishing biological richness. Some fossil localities preserve evidence for more than 60 mammal species living within the same broad landscape. Rhinoceroses browsed among dense woodlands, while forest giraffes reached into leafy canopies. Flying squirrels crossed between towering trees. Saber-toothed predators hunted through shaded undergrowth, and several species of apes occupied different ecological roles within the same environment. Such diversity reflected forests that remained productive throughout much of the year, sustaining countless specialized forms of life. Around 9.75 million years ago, that pattern shifted decisively. Fossil records reveal extinction rates climbing well beyond the appearance of new species. Communities once filled with forest-adapted mammals became noticeably less diverse as evergreen habitats contracted. The transformation unfolded across successive generations rather than in a single moment. Yet its direction remained unmistakable. Europe's familiar subtropical forests steadily yielded to increasingly seasonal woodlands. Among the most significant losses were the great apes that had prospered across the continent for millions of years. Dryopithecus disappeared from the fossil record. Oncorapithecus also vanished from regions where it had once lived, while Gracopithecus, likewise, faded from Europe's known fossil history within a comparatively short geological span. These lineages had evolved alongside expanding forests, and their fortunes remained closely tied to those habitats. The driving force behind their decline was not the widespread expansion of grasslands that would become more prominent later. Instead, forests themselves were changing. Evergreen canopies gave way to deciduous woodlands, experiencing stronger seasonal variation, cooler conditions, and less dependable supplies of fruit. Apes that depended upon extensive subtropical forests encountered landscapes that no longer matched the environments in which their evolutionary success had unfolded. Other primates proved better suited to the changing conditions. Colobine monkeys, represented by Mesopithecus, began appearing across parts of Eastern Europe during this interval. Their arrival reflected more than the spread of a single lineage. It illustrated a broader ecological transition in which monkeys increasingly occupied habitats that had once supported remarkable ape diversity. The balance among primates continued shifting, one landscape at a time. A few European apes lingered beyond the main crisis. Oreopithecus remained isolated upon its Mediterranean island, protected for a time by geography rather than climate alone. Hispanopithecus persisted briefly in parts of Spain before disappearing as well. Their survival lasted only a little longer before the same long trend reached them. By roughly 7 million years ago, Europe no longer preserves fossil evidence for living apes. A continent that had sheltered them through nearly 10 million years of changing history had become a place where their remarkable age had drawn to its close. A shoreline that had existed for countless generations began pulling away from the land. Each passing century revealed a little more exposed ground where waves had once broken, until an inland sea that had shaped climates across 3 continents entered one of the most extraordinary transformations in Earth's history. Around 5.96 million years ago, the connection between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean was severed as tectonic forces raised the Betic Cordillera in what is now southern Spain, closing the final marine gateway. What followed is known as the Messinian salinity crisis, one of the most remarkable geological episodes of the past 65 million years. The Mediterranean, covering an area comparable to the modern United States, no longer received enough ocean water to balance relentless evaporation beneath a warm climate. Rivers continued flowing into the basin, yet they could not replace the immense volume of water disappearing into the atmosphere year after year. Across roughly 630,000 years, sea levels within the basin fell dramatically. Vast stretches of former seabed emerged into daylight, while enormous quantities of dissolved salt settled onto the basin floor. In some places, those salt deposits eventually exceeded half a mile in thickness, preserving an immense geological record beneath later sediments. Deep depressions continued holding isolated lakes, but much of the landscape between them became an immense salt covered plain, unlike anything visible around the Mediterranean today. The disappearance of so much water reshaped regional climate as profoundly as it altered geography. Moisture that had once evaporated from the Mediterranean into surrounding air masses diminished substantially. Southern Europe and North Africa received less dependable rainfall, while seasonal differences became stronger across many landscapes. Temperatures fluctuated more widely than before, placing increasing stress upon forests that had already been shrinking through millions of years of gradual climatic change. For ape populations, these environmental shifts likely deepened an already difficult situation. Woodland habitats had become fragmented through earlier cooling, leaving surviving groups increasingly separated from one another. As rainfall patterns continued changing and forests retreated farther, remaining populations may have found themselves isolated within scattered refuges, unable to exchange individuals across broad distances. Small populations generally possess fewer opportunities to recover from environmental pressures, making continued survival progressively more difficult. Yet the drying sea also produced an unexpected possibility. As water levels continued falling, land connections emerged between regions previously separated by marine barriers. Mammals could move across territories that had once required impossible crossings. Some researchers have proposed that apes may also have dispersed through these temporary corridors, traveling between North Africa and Europe during this unusual interval. The available fossil evidence remains too limited to confirm such journeys with certainty, leaving the idea an intriguing scientific hypothesis rather than an established conclusion. Around 5.3 million years ago, the story changed once more. The Atlantic Ocean broke through the rocky barrier, known today as the Cameronal Sill near the modern Strait of Gibraltar. An immense torrent rushed into the nearly empty basin in what geologists call the Zanclean Flood. The returning water carved enormous channels while rapidly refilling the Mediterranean. Estimates differ regarding its duration, ranging from months to several thousand years, yet all indicate one of the most powerful flooding events ever recognized in Earth's geological history. With the sea restored, the Miocene reached its closing chapter. Coastlines returned, climates continued evolving, and the stage was prepared for a new epoch whose living communities would inherit a world profoundly reshaped by water, stone, and time. A long transformation was reaching its natural consequence. Across landscapes where ape populations had once flourished in remarkable variety, another branch of the primate family was steadily finding new opportunities. The same environmental pressures that narrowed the world for apes rewarded animals able to reproduce more rapidly, feed more flexibly, and travel through increasingly broken habitats. As one age gradually faded, another expanded into the space it left behind. For much of the Miocene, Old World monkeys occupied only a modest place within African ecosystems. Their fossil record remained comparatively sparse, represented by relatively few genera, while apes diversified into an astonishing range of forms. Forests rich in fruit and continuous canopy favored the slower pace of ape life histories. As climates shifted across millions of years, however, conditions increasingly rewarded a different collection of biological traits. Without any sudden replacement, monkeys began gaining advantages that accumulated generation after generation. One advantage lay in reproduction itself. Monkeys generally experienced shorter pregnancies, weaned their offspring earlier, and produced young at shorter intervals than apes. Following droughts, poor fruit seasons, or local population declines, these faster reproductive cycles allowed monkey populations to recover more quickly. Apes invested heavily in each infant, raising a single youngster over many years before another birth became possible. That strategy worked well in dependable forests, yet it became increasingly costly as favorable habitats contracted and environmental uncertainty grew. Food offered another important difference. Old World monkeys possessed distinctive molars known as bilophodont teeth, featuring parallel ridges that efficiently processed leaves, firm fruits, seeds, and other tough plant material. Such diets remained available even when forests produced fewer soft, energy-rich fruits. Many ape species relied more heavily upon foods that fluctuated with changing seasons. As evergreen forests gave way to more seasonal woodlands, monkeys could draw nourishment from a wider selection of resources scattered across the landscape, reducing their dependence upon any single source. Movement also became increasingly important as forests fragmented. Continuous canopy had once allowed many apes to travel efficiently above the ground through connected woodlands stretching across immense distances. Shrinking forests interrupted those pathways. Old World monkeys proved adept at moving through both trees and open ground, crossing gaps that became more common as woodland patches separated from one another. Their versatility allowed them to occupy mosaics of forest, woodland, and more open environments with growing success. Across Africa and parts of Asia, these differences gradually reshaped primate communities. Monkey populations expanded into habitats where ape numbers continued declining. Fossil evidence records this changing balance with increasing clarity as the later Miocene gave way to the Pliocene. Beginning around 5.3 million years ago, Old World monkeys diversified into well over 130 species, spreading across varied environments while only a small number of ape lineages remained. Those surviving apes persisted within scattered forests that still offered conditions resembling the broader world their ancestors had once occupied. The reversal stands among the most striking patterns preserved in primate evolution. During the height of the Miocene, apes represented the dominant experiment, exploring an extraordinary range of bodies, diets, and behaviors across three continents. Today, monkeys far outnumber them, while the great ape family survives in only a handful of living branches. The world had turned gradually toward a different balance, guided not by a single catastrophe, but by millions of years of steady environmental change. The immense family tree that had spread across forests from Europe to Eastern Asia now narrowed into only a few living branches. Countless Miocene ape species had appeared, flourished, and disappeared across millions of years, each shaped by landscapes that no longer existed. As climates cooled and forests withdrew, survival ceased to depend upon how widely a lineage had expanded. It depended upon finding one place where the old world endured a little longer. Among the survivors were the gibbons, members of the family known as Hylobatidae. Their future unfolded within the forests of Southeast Asia, where dense canopies still stretched across humid mountains and valleys. Over countless generations, they became masters of movement through the treetops, traveling by swinging beneath branches with extraordinary speed and precision. Smaller bodies required less food than the larger apes, while fruit-rich forests continued supplying the resources needed for their energetic way of life. Today, roughly 20 living species remain, all confined to Southeast and East Asia, each carrying forward a lineage whose ancestors escaped the broader collapse of Miocene forests. Another branch followed a different path. The orangutans descended from the Civipithecus lineage that had once occupied broad regions of southern Asia. As seasonal climates intensified across the mainland, forests became increasingly fragmented and less dependable. The deepest refuges remained upon the great islands of Borneo and Sumatra, where tropical rainforests persisted through changing climates. There, orangutans continued their deliberate lives among towering trees, preserving characteristics that echoed ancestors from many millions of years earlier. Only two living species survive today, and both face an uncertain future as the forests that protected them continue shrinking. Africa sheltered the remaining great apes. Gorillas and chimpanzees endured within the equatorial rainforests that retained much of the moisture and dense vegetation disappearing elsewhere. These forests represented some of the last substantial fragments of the broader Miocene world. They provided continuous canopy, dependable rainfall, and diverse plant communities capable of supporting large-bodied apes despite the changing global climate. Modern classifications recognize 4 gorilla species or subspecies depending upon scientific interpretation, along with 2 species of chimpanzee. Every surviving population exists under increasing pressure, reminding us that their ancient refuges have never been guaranteed. Despite their differences in size, movement, and behavior, all living apes share one remarkable pattern. Each lineage found a refuge that remained wet enough, forested enough, or geographically isolated enough to preserve conditions their ancestors required. None survived by continuing the broad expansion that had once carried apes across 3 continents. Their persistence reflects places where environmental change arrived more gradually or where local geography softened its effects. The strategy that had defined the height of the Miocene eventually became its greatest weakness. Expansion across immense ranges succeeded while forests covered much of the landscape without interruption. Once those forests broke apart, widespread populations became separated into isolated fragments unable to reconnect. Lineages occupying specialized habitats disappeared one after another as suitable environments continued shrinking across generations. Survival demanded an unusual combination of retreat, ecological specialization, and chance. Most Miocene apes possessed only part of that combination, while a fortunate few encountered landscapes capable of sustaining them through profound planetary change. Every living ape represents one of those rare successes, carrying within its existence the final surviving threads of a family that once shaped forests across much of the Old World. Across much of the Old World, the Great Retreat had already unfolded. Europe had lost its apes. Asia sheltered only scattered survivors, and forests that once stretched across continents had become increasingly divided. Africa, however, was changing in a different way. The continent still preserved extensive forests, yet powerful geological forces were gradually reshaping the land itself, creating conditions unlike any that had existed during the height of the Miocene. One of the greatest of those forces was the East African Rift System, a vast fracture extending from northeastern Africa toward the south. It did not appear in a single moment. The crust slowly stretched, cracked, and subsided while volcanic activity lifted new highlands along its margins. Valleys deepened, mountains rose, and rivers found new courses across the changing landscape. Geography itself became an active participant in evolution, altering where forests could thrive and where dry country gradually expanded. Those rising mountains transformed the movement of moisture through the atmosphere. Winds carrying water from the Atlantic Ocean encountered newly elevated terrain before reaching eastern Africa. As the air climbed mountain slopes, much of its moisture fell as rain on the western side. Beyond the peaks, descending air became drier, creating an expanding rain shadow across eastern regions. Forests that had once remained broadly connected became interrupted by woodland, scrub, and increasingly seasonal environments shaped by alternating wet and dry periods. For forest-dwelling apes living in eastern Africa, these changes unfolded across countless generations. Habitats that had once merged into continuous canopy became isolated into smaller patches separated by more open country. Some populations remained within forests that still retained familiar conditions. Others found themselves occupying the margins where trees met expanding woodland. Still others became isolated altogether, cut off from neighboring groups by landscapes that grew less suitable with every passing age. The fossil record from this interval offers only scattered glimpses of what followed. Compared with earlier chapters of ape evolution, the late Miocene of Africa preserves relatively few discoveries, leaving many relationships uncertain. Bones that might have answered important questions have either not survived or remain buried beyond present knowledge. Even so, several remarkable genera appear within this fragmentary record, each representing populations that lived during this pivotal transition. Around 7 million years ago, Sahelanthropus lived in what is now Chad. Roughly 1 million years later, Oran occupied parts of present-day Kenya. By approximately 5.8 million years ago, Ardipithecus appeared in Ethiopia, continuing until about 4.4 million years ago. Each genus possessed unmistakable ape ancestry, while displaying anatomical features that have attracted enduring scientific attention. None fits neatly within the familiar image of either modern apes or later humans. They occupy a narrow boundary where older patterns had begun giving way to something different. Researchers continue debating exactly how these genera are related and whether each belongs directly within the human lineage. Their fossil remains remain incomplete, encouraging careful interpretation rather than certainty. Even within that uncertainty, a broader picture emerges. Populations living along fragmented forests and increasingly varied environments encountered evolutionary pressures unlike those experienced by their ancestors during the lush expanses of the early Miocene. The surviving African apes had not escaped change. They lived where shifting climate, rising mountains, and shrinking forests converged upon a landscape unlike any before it. Within that changing refuge, one branch of the ancient ape family began following a path that no earlier lineage had explored, carrying forward the last living legacy of a world that had almost entirely disappeared. No single footprint marks the beginning of upright walking. There is no hillside where the first ape rose forever onto two legs, nor any fossil preserving that exact instant. The change unfolded across many generations as small adjustments accumulated within populations living where forests no longer stretched without interruption. Along those shifting margins, a different way of moving gradually became part of everyday survival. Walking on two legs was never an easy solution. Compared with moving on all fours, it demanded a body balanced in entirely new ways. Muscles carried unfamiliar loads, joints absorbed different stresses, and every stride required careful coordination from head to foot. The energetic costs were considerable, yet natural selection does not favor comfort. It favors whatever improves survival, often enough to leave descendants, even when the path is demanding. The leading explanation places this transformation at the forest edge, where shrinking woodlands became separated by expanding stretches of open country. An ape traveling between isolated groves benefited from standing higher above surrounding vegetation, gaining a broader view across the landscape. Upright posture also freed the hands to carry gathered fruit, branches, or infants while moving between patches of shelter. Covering short distances across exposed ground became more practical when the body could balance efficiently over two supporting limbs instead of four. Such behavior could not emerge without profound changes beneath the skin. The opening where the spinal column joins the skull gradually shifted into a position that balanced the head above an upright body. The pelvis became shorter and broader, creating stronger support for muscles responsible for balance during each step. Knees evolved to bear weight beneath the body's center instead of spreading outward. Ankles became more stable under repeated impact, while the foot developed a firmer arch and a forward-pointing great toe capable of pushing the body ahead. Across countless generations, arms also became proportionally shorter compared with the legs, reflecting a gradual shift away from complete dependence on life in the trees. Evidence for this transformation appears surprisingly early. Around 6 million years ago, Orrorin tugenensis possessed a thigh bone displaying structural features consistent with habitual upright walking. The upper portion of the femur reveals patterns of bone distribution expected in an individual placing substantial weight upon extended hind limbs. At the same time, other parts of the skeleton indicate an animal that still climbed effectively among branches. This was not yet a human body. It remained unmistakably ape-like while combining two different styles of movement within a single life. That combination carries one of the deepest implications in human evolution. Enlarged brains had not yet appeared. Faces remained projecting. Arms retained climbing ability, and many ancestral characteristics endured. Upright walking emerged millions of years before the remarkable expansion of intelligence that would later distinguish humans from every other surviving ape. The order of these events reshapes the entire story. Standing came first, Greater cognitive capacity followed much later. The boundary between woodland and open country became more than a changing habitat. It became an evolutionary workshop where survival rewarded flexibility instead of permanence. An ape adapted to diminishing forests, discovered that altering the way it moved could open possibilities unavailable to its ancestors. From that gradual adjustment, carried forward one generation after another, an entirely new branch of the ape family continued its long journey through a changing world. Some scientific ideas reshape an entire map with only a handful of fossils. Among the most debated in paleoanthropology is the proposal that the ancestry of modern African great apes may not have remained in Africa throughout its history. Instead, part of that story may have unfolded far to the north, within the forests that once covered much of Europe during the Miocene. This hypothesis has been developed most prominently by paleoanthropologist David Began and several colleagues. Their work draws attention to anatomical features shared by living gorillas and chimpanzees with certain European fossil apes. Characteristics such as frontal sinuses, aspects of the brow ridge, and a downward angled facial structure appear in fossils from Europe before comparable traits are clearly documented within the sparse African record. Rudapithecus, discovered in what is now Hungary, occupies a central place in this discussion because its skull preserves several of these features in striking combination. The proposed sequence follows a dramatic path across continents. During the flourishing forests of the Middle and Late Miocene, ape populations spread widely through Eurasia. As climates cooled and evergreen forests contracted, Europe became increasingly difficult for forest specialists to inhabit. According to this interpretation, one branch descended from the European Dryopithecines eventually moved southward into Africa, carrying anatomical characteristics that later appeared among the ancestors of gorillas and chimpanzees. Rather than Europe serving as the end of an evolutionary journey, it became an important stage within a longer migration. One possible opportunity for such movement may have arrived during the Messinian salinity crisis, when the connection between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea closed. Water levels dropped dramatically across the basin. New land routes linked regions that had long been separated by open water. Mammals dispersed across these temporary corridors, leaving evidence of changing distributions on both sides of the basin. Some researchers have suggested that ape populations might also have crossed these connections, retreating toward habitats that still supported substantial forest cover as environmental conditions deteriorated across southern Europe. If this interpretation proves correct, the implications extend far beyond geography. Gorillas and chimpanzees, humanity's closest living relatives, would trace part of their ancestry through European forests before returning to Africa. The familiar picture of ape evolution confined to a single continent would become considerably more dynamic, shaped by repeated expansion, retreat, and recolonization as climates transformed landscapes over millions of years. Many researchers remain unconvinced. Africa possesses relatively few late Miocene ape fossils, leaving enormous gaps in the record. A missing fossil cannot demonstrate that an ancestor never existed there. Similar anatomical traits may also arise independently in separate populations exposed to comparable evolutionary pressures. This process, known as parallel evolution, can produce closely matching structures without requiring direct ancestry. Under that explanation, European apes and African great apes evolved comparable features while following distinct evolutionary histories. The discussion, therefore, remains unresolved, sustained by evidence that is both intriguing and incomplete. Each newly discovered fossil has the potential to strengthen one interpretation or weaken another. Whatever future discoveries reveal, the hypothesis has already transformed the way many scientists view the Miocene world. Europe no longer appears as an isolated evolutionary side branch, fading into extinction. It stands as a possible crossroads where the history of the great apes may have turned before continuing its long passage through Africa. A long history can sometimes be measured with surprising clarity. Layer by layer, fossil sites scattered across Africa, Europe, and Asia preserve fragments of a family that once flourished on a scale almost unimaginable today. Although every discovery adds new pieces to the record, the broad pattern has become unmistakable. The ape world that reached its height during the Miocene was richer, broader, and more varied than anything still living. At that peak, the fossil record documents at least 20 recognized genera of apes and as many as 100 species. Even those figures almost certainly fall short of reality. Complete skeletons are uncommon. Soft tissues disappear soon after death, and many ancient forests left few conditions favorable for fossil preservation. Entire populations may have lived and vanished without leaving a single recognizable trace. Each new excavation continues to expand the picture, suggesting that the true diversity was probably even greater than current evidence can demonstrate. The modern world presents a far narrower portrait. Living apes belong to only two surviving families. One consists of the gibbons, agile inhabitants of the forests of Southeast and East Asia. The other contains the great apes, including orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos, and humans. Excluding humanity, roughly 18 to 20 non-human ape species remain, depending upon how specialists classify individual populations. Compared with the richness of the Miocene, that represents only a small remnant of a once expansive family tree. Expressed another way, roughly 4/5 of known ape diversity disappeared during the late Miocene and the following Pliocene. This decline unfolded over millions of years rather than during a single catastrophe, yet its cumulative effect proved extraordinary. Generation after generation, lineages vanished until only a handful continued forward. Each extinction removed unique combinations of anatomy, behavior, and evolutionary history that had developed through immense stretches of time. Body size tells a similar story. Miocene apes occupied an enormous range, from species weighing little more than 22 pounds to the immense Gigantopithecus, whose estimated weight exceeded 1,200 pounds. No living primate approaches that upper limit. Among today's non-human apes, the smallest gibbons weigh roughly 10 to 20 pounds, while the largest western lowland gorillas may reach about 400 pounds. The colossal forms that once browsed through Asian forests belong entirely to the fossil record, leaving no direct descendants to match their scale. Geography reveals an equally dramatic contraction. During the Miocene, apes occupied forests stretching across 3 continents. Fossils have been recovered from at least 15 modern nations, including sites throughout Africa, Europe, and Asia. Their distribution reflected a planet where favorable habitats extended across regions that are now temperate, seasonal, or dry. As climates shifted and forests fragmented, those broad connections disappeared, one after another. The surviving non-human apes now occupy only equatorial Africa and a handful of islands and forests in Southeast Asia. Their modern range represents only a fraction of the territory once inhabited by their ancestors. The transformation is not symbolic or poetic. It is documented in stone, measured through fossils, and traced across vanished landscapes. Most branches of the ape family ended long before the present day. The survivors, including our own lineage, continue the story as the remaining members of an inheritance that was once far larger than the living world now reveals. An extinction can appear puzzling until the hidden cost of success comes into view. The qualities that once allowed apes to flourish across broad forests eventually became liabilities as those forests diminished. Evolution offers no permanent advantage. Every adaptation carries a price, and that price is revealed only when the world itself begins to change. The life history of an ape was built upon stability. Individuals matured gradually, produced relatively few offspring, and devoted years to raising each infant. Young apes remained close to their mothers through long periods of learning, absorbing complex social relationships, food gathering skills, and the countless behaviors needed for life in the forest. Large brains demanded enormous amounts of energy, yet those brains rewarded patience with flexible behavior, cooperation, memory, and problem solving. Within the abundant forests of the Miocene, this strategy proved remarkably successful because resources remained dependable across long stretches of time. A changing climate altered those conditions one piece at a time. Forests became patchier, fruiting seasons less predictable, and local populations increasingly isolated from one another. Under such circumstances, recovery after hardship depended less upon intelligence than upon reproductive speed. A species capable of replacing lost individuals rapidly possessed an advantage that had mattered little during earlier ages of environmental abundance. The contrast between apes and monkeys becomes especially clear through development. A chimpanzee generally requires about 13 years before reaching sexual maturity. Many baboons reach that milestone after only 5 or 6 years. Each generation of monkeys therefore arrived much sooner than each generation of apes. Population losses that required decades for apes to replace could be recovered far more rapidly by monkeys living under the same environmental pressures. Across thousands of generations, that difference steadily reshaped entire ecosystems. Diet strengthened the contrast. Most apes depended heavily upon ripe fruit, a rich source of energy that supported large bodies and metabolically expensive brains. Their digestive systems functioned best when high-quality foods remained readily available. Many Old World monkeys possessed molars, especially suited for crushing tougher vegetation, seeds, and leaves that ripened fruit specialists used less efficiently. During years when fruit became scarce, monkeys could continue feeding from a broader menu of resources, while many apes faced increasing nutritional stress. These differences reveal one of evolution's enduring trade-offs. Greater intelligence carries extraordinary benefits, yet it also demands greater investment. A large brain requires prolonged childhood, extensive parental care, and dependable nutrition. Every generation represents years of accumulated effort before offspring become capable of reproducing themselves. Such an investment succeeds when environments remain sufficiently consistent for those long developmental periods to reach completion. When landscapes transformed more rapidly than those extended life cycles could accommodate, the balance shifted. Intelligence remained valuable, but it could not immediately compensate for shrinking forests, declining food supplies, or repeated population losses. Adaptation through natural selection proceeds generation by generation. Species producing fewer generations within the same span of time respond more gradually to accelerating environmental change. The growing success of monkeys, therefore, reflected biological flexibility more than superiority. Faster reproduction, broader diets, and movement across both woodland and open ground matched the demands of an increasingly seasonal planet. Apes had evolved for a world that rewarded endurance and investment. The emerging world favored resilience through speed. Across millions of years, those contrasting strategies determined which branches of the primate family expanded and which steadily withdrew into the remaining forests that still echoed with the rhythms of an older Earth. A map can preserve memories that no living creature remembers. Across Europe, roads, vineyards, towns, and cultivated valleys now occupy landscapes where apes once traveled through broad forest canopies. Their footsteps have vanished, their calls no longer carried through the trees, and almost everything that marked their presence disappeared long before the first human history was ever recorded. What remains rests inside layers of stone, waiting for careful excavation to reveal a world that once seemed ordinary. Southern France offers one such forgotten landscape. Fossils of Dryopithecus emerged from deposits that formed when warm forests covered the region. Today, those same hills support vineyards stretching across gentle slopes beneath familiar skies. Farther south, the forests that sheltered Pierolopithecus in Catalonia have yielded to expanding communities surrounding Barcelona. In Hungary, valleys where Rudopithecus climbed through dense woodland now support fields shaped by generations of agriculture. None of these places appear especially suited to wild apes today, yet each belong to their world for immense spans of time. Natural climate change transformed much of that environment during the late Miocene as cooling and increasing seasonality reshaped forests across Europe. Another transformation arrived much later, beginning roughly 10,000 years ago, when growing human populations cleared woodland for settlements and farming. Modern landscapes, therefore, reflect both ancient geological forces and comparatively recent human activity. The result is a continent carrying deep biological history beneath terrain that reveals almost none of it at first glance. Paleontologists sometimes think in terms of ghost ranges, geographical regions where a species formerly lived but survives only through fossils. A ghost range cannot be recognized by watching the living landscape. It appears only when ancient bones emerge from sediment, revealing that familiar places once supported creatures now completely absent. The present offers little hint that those regions belonged to entirely different communities for millions of years before modern ecosystems took shape. The Ghost Range of Miocene apes extends across much of Africa, Europe, and Asia, reaching places where encountering a wild ape today would seem almost unimaginable. Fossils discovered in Spain, France, Hungary, Turkey, Greece, Pakistan, India, and China remind us that their distribution once covered an enormous portion of the Old World. Modern survival is confined instead to equatorial Africa and parts of Southeast Asia, representing only a small remnant of their former reach. The apparent impossibility of European apes belongs only to recent geological time. Ghost ranges are accompanied by ghost niches, ecological roles that vanish together with the species that performed them. European subtropical forests once supported large fruit-eating apes that matured gradually and shaped the movement of seeds through woodland ecosystems. The islands of the ancient Mediterranean nurtured Oreopithecus, an unusual ape unlike anything alive today. Southern China later sheltered Gigantopithecus, whose immense body represented a scale no surviving ape approaches. Each occupied a way of life that no modern animal has fully replaced. Those vacant roles have remained unfilled for millions of years. Forests continued changing, climates continued shifting, and new species emerged, yet certain combinations of body, behavior, and environment never returned. Fossils preserve their outlines with remarkable clarity, while the living world offers only their absence. Across familiar maps, these forgotten territories endure as ghost ranges, reminding us that Earth's present arrangement is only the latest chapter of a far older landscape. Where apes once belonged, almost everywhere the forests reached. Nature rarely leaves a place unoccupied for long. As one branch of the primate family dwindled across the changing landscapes of the late Miocene, another found conditions increasingly favorable. The transition unfolded across countless generations without a single decisive moment. Forests became more seasonal, open habitats spread, and the primates best suited to that shifting world steadily expanded into opportunities their relatives could no longer hold. Old world monkeys had existed throughout much of the Miocene, though they occupied a comparatively modest place beside the remarkable variety of apes. Their greatest expansion began as climates continued changing through the late Miocene and into the Pliocene. Evolution rewarded traits that matched the new environments. Populations recovered more rapidly after difficult seasons. Diets remained flexible when favored foods became scarce. Movement between trees and open ground required less specialization. Those advantages accumulated generation after generation until old world monkeys experienced one of the most successful radiations in primate history. From their African origins, these adaptable primates spread across an extraordinary geographic range. They reached southern Europe, crossed the Middle East, and dispersed through much of Asia. Forests, woodlands, grasslands, rocky mountains, and seasonal landscapes all became suitable homes for different branches of the group. Instead of depending upon one particular forest structure or a narrow collection of foods, many lineages adjusted to remarkably different ecological conditions, allowing their diversity to continue growing as environments shifted around them. The living descendants of that expansion include baboons roaming open country, guenons inhabiting tropical forests, mangabeys moving through woodland canopies, langurs feeding across southern and eastern Asia, and leaf-eating colobine monkeys occupying habitats that stretch from tropical forests to mountain slopes. More than 130 recognized species now inhabit Africa and Asia, representing an astonishing range of lifestyles. Among them are Japanese macaques living through snowy winters and primates inhabiting the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, demonstrating a flexibility unmatched by any surviving ape lineage. No genus illustrates this success more clearly than macaca. Today, macaques occupy the widest natural distribution of any non-human primate, extending from Morocco across much of Asia to Japan. Their adaptability allows different species to thrive in coastal forests, inland mountains, temperate woodlands, and tropical environments alike. During the Miocene, however, macaques had not yet emerged as dominant members of the primate community. That earlier world belonged overwhelmingly to apes, whose diversity covered continents now associated with entirely different animals. The transformation, therefore, was never a passage from abundance into emptiness. Ecological roles remained available, and forests still required seed dispersers, social foragers, and adaptable tree-dwelling mammals. Evolution filled many of those positions with different occupants. Where apes once represented the dominant large primates across broad regions, monkeys gradually assumed many comparable ecological functions while following their own distinctive evolutionary paths. One place captures that history with unusual clarity. On the Rock of Gibraltar lives the only population of wild primates in Europe. Today, the Barbary macaques. Visitors sometimes refer to them as the apes of Gibraltar, preserving an old habit of speech that overlooks an important distinction. They are monkeys, not apes. The true European apes vanished around 7 million years ago, leaving fossils as their final testimony. The macaques are successful successors, flourishing in a continent where another primate dynasty once reigned, carrying forward life in landscapes forever changed by time. Knowledge often advances through remarkable discoveries, yet it also grows from recognizing what remains absent. The story of the Miocene apes contains magnificent skeletons, scattered teeth, fragments of jaws, and forests reconstructed from ancient sediments. Between those discoveries lie intervals where the record grows remarkably sparse. Those empty spaces are more than missing pages. They shape nearly every discussion about how the surviving ape lineages emerged from a once abundant family. Nowhere is that uncertainty greater than in Africa during the late Miocene, spanning roughly 10 million to 5 million years ago. This interval witnessed the separation of the evolutionary branches leading toward gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. It should preserve some of the most significant fossils in primate history. Instead, only a handful of sites have yielded remains from that crucial period, leaving researchers with an uneven record that reveals broad patterns while concealing many of the details connecting one lineage to another. Among the greatest mysteries is the identity of the last common ancestor shared by chimpanzees and humans. Evolutionary biology, comparative anatomy, and genetic evidence leave little doubt that such a creature once lived. It occupied African landscapes millions of years before either modern lineage appeared. Despite decades of exploration across promising fossil-bearing regions, no specimen has gained broad scientific acceptance as that ancestor. Its existence is certain, while its bones remain undiscovered. Few missing fossils have inspired such sustained effort across generations of paleontologists. Another branch of the ape family presents an equally puzzling absence. Gibbons represent the most species-rich family of living apes, flourishing today across Southeast Asia through extraordinary agility among the forest canopy. Their deeper evolutionary history, however, remains remarkably elusive. Fossils confidently attributed to early gibbons are exceptionally uncommon, making it difficult to determine exactly when their distinctive anatomy first evolved or how their ancestors fit within the broader Miocene radiation. A successful modern group, therefore, carries surprisingly little fossil evidence from its earliest chapters. Many extinct Miocene apes are also known from astonishingly modest remains. A single tooth, part of a lower jaw, or an isolated fragment of enamel may preserve enough anatomical detail to distinguish one species from another. Careful comparison of microscopic ridges, tooth proportions, and patterns of wear allows researchers to recognize unique evolutionary lineages from fossils scarcely larger than a fingertip. Such reconstructions demand caution, yet they also demonstrate how much biological information can survive within the hardest tissues of the body. New analytical techniques continue expanding what those fossils can reveal. Stable isotope studies of fossil teeth now recover evidence of seasonal rainfall, vegetation, and dietary shifts experienced during an individual animal's lifetime. A tooth no longer serves only as anatomical evidence. It becomes an environmental diary, preserving chemical traces of changing landscapes that surrounded an ape millions of years before the fossil reached a museum collection. Fresh discoveries continue reminding scientists that the Miocene narrative remains unfinished. During 2026, researchers described Mazrapithecus magraensis from Egypt, an ape dating to roughly 17 to 18 million years ago. Its discovery extended knowledge of early ape diversity and demonstrated that entirely new members of this ancient family are still emerging from long studied deposits. The Miocene, therefore, remains an open record. Every excavation, every newly examined specimen, and every refined analytical method carries the possibility of reshaping ideas about the evolutionary path that ultimately led to the living apes, including ourselves. Every person alive carries a history that began long before the first village, the first fire tended with intention, or the first word ever spoken. That history reaches back into the Miocene, to a time when one small population of African apes endured changes that erased nearly all of its relatives. Humanity did not appear as a sudden departure from nature. It emerged from an ancient branch of the great ape family, shaped by landscapes already transformed through millions of years of shifting climate, retreating forests, and relentless evolutionary selection. The lineage leading toward humans developed among apes living along the edges of shrinking woodlands in late Miocene Africa. These populations occupied places where continuous forest gave way to more open terrain, demanding new behaviors while preserving old ones. Every generation inherited bodies designed for climbing, grasping, and social cooperation, yet each also encountered conditions that rewarded flexibility. Evolution acted gradually, preserving small advantages that accumulated across immense stretches of time until a distinct path separated one lineage from every other surviving ape. Walking upright became one of those defining changes. Bipedal movement was never an isolated innovation. It reflected life in fragmented habitats, where moving efficiently between patches of woodland offered repeated advantages. Freed hands could transport food, gather useful objects, or care for offspring while traveling. The skeletal adjustments required for upright walking unfolded over countless generations, creating a body unlike that of any earlier ape while preserving unmistakable traces of its arboreal ancestry. Another inheritance reached even farther into the future. The large brains, already characteristic of apes, represented an expensive biological investment, demanding prolonged growth, abundant nutrition, and extended care from parents and social groups. Rather than abandoning that strategy, the human lineage intensified it. Brain size increased gradually, while learning became an ever greater source of survival. Adaptation depended less upon immediate physical specialization and increasingly upon remembering, observing, communicating, and discovering new responses to unfamiliar challenges. That transformation also preserved the slow rhythm of ape development. Human childhood became longer than that of any other primate, extending the period during which experience could shape the mind. Skills accumulated across years instead of months, allowing knowledge to pass from one generation to another with increasing complexity. The social bonds already characteristic of apes expanded into communities capable of sustaining prolonged learning, cooperation, and cultural tradition. Hands that once gripped branches supplied another essential inheritance. Flexible shoulders, sensitive fingers, and precise manual control first evolved for climbing through forest canopies. Over immense spans of time, those same anatomical features found new purposes. Stones, wood, bone, and eventually countless other materials became extensions of the hand rather than substitutes for it. Tool use, therefore, represented the continuation of abilities, first refined among Miocene trees, redirected toward reshaping the surrounding world. Seen from this perspective, humanity remains inseparable from the Miocene. Language, technology, art, science, and civilization stand upon anatomical and behavioral foundations established during roughly 18 million years of ape evolution. Those vanished forests continue to echo through every human thought and every human hand. There is a striking paradox within that inheritance. The qualities that ultimately carried one modest ape lineage through an era of environmental instability, curiosity, behavioral flexibility, cooperation, and the capacity to learn beyond instinct, later produced towering cities, medicine, exploration, music, and mathematics. The same capacities also made warfare, environmental destruction, and unprecedented ecological change possible. Both achievements and failures belong to a legacy rooted in the Miocene, where one surviving branch of an ancient family continued a journey that none of its lost relatives would ever complete. The stone record does more than preserve vanished creatures, it also preserves patterns across layers, separated by immense spans of time. The Miocene reveals how living communities responded when the world around them shifted beyond familiar limits. The details belong to another age, yet the underlying processes remain recognizable, linking a forgotten past with the conditions unfolding across the present. The climatic transformation that reshaped the late Miocene arose through natural forces acting together across millions of years. Mountain ranges altered atmospheric circulation, ocean currents changed their pathways. Carbon dioxide gradually declined, allowing expanding polar ice to influence temperatures across the globe. Forests contracted little by little as rainfall patterns evolved, replacing once continuous woodlands with landscapes that demanded new strategies for survival. Even at that measured pace, the consequences proved profound. Most ape lineages disappeared, leaving only a handful to continue their evolutionary journey. The circumstances surrounding modern climate change differ in their origin, yet they share an unsettling feature. Environmental conditions are shifting once again, though this transformation is unfolding across centuries instead of millions of years. Changes that once accumulated over geological ages are now compressed into intervals short enough to be witnessed within recorded history. Evolution operates generation by generation, while the landscape itself is changing far more rapidly than long-lived species can biologically accommodate. The remaining non-human apes occupy forests already reduced to fragments of their former extent. The Congo Basin still shelters gorillas and chimpanzees beneath towering canopies. Borneo and Sumatra continue to support orangutans among forests threaded with rivers and wetlands. Across each of these regions, expanding agriculture, logging, mining, road construction, and changing climate place increasing pressure upon habitats that once stretched across much broader territories. The spaces separating ape populations continue to widen as continuous forest becomes isolated patches. Such fragmentation echoes conditions that emerged during the closing chapters of the Miocene. Populations confined to smaller habitats encounter fewer feeding opportunities, greater isolation, and reduced genetic exchange. Fruiting seasons become less predictable as environmental conditions shift. Individuals must travel farther between resources while remaining within landscapes that offer diminishing shelter. These pressures resemble those recorded in the fossil story, although they now advance at a pace unlike anything experienced during that earlier transition. No gorilla, chimpanzee, or orangutan can evolve entirely new adaptations within a few decades. Their reproductive lives unfold gradually, each generation separated by many years. The evolutionary processes that once produced upright walking, changing diets, or altered anatomy required countless generations under sustained selection. That biological rhythm cannot accelerate to match environmental disruption occurring within a single human lifetime. One difference separates the present from every chapter preserved in Miocene rock. Earlier transformations unfolded without intention. Mountains rose, oceans shifted, climates cooled, and no living creature possessed the capacity to understand those changes, much less influence them. Today, one species has acquired both abilities. Humans can measure atmospheric change, reconstruct vanished ecosystems, recover fossil evidence, and recognize the biological consequences before they fully unfold. The Miocene therefore stands as more than a distant episode in natural history. It offers a completed record of how vulnerable, even successful lineages can become when environments transform beyond their capacity to respond. Unlike the apes, whose future was determined entirely by forces beyond their control, we inherit the unusual position of reading that ancient record while still participating in the story that follows. Near the close of this long journey, the story narrows from continents and millions of years to living faces still moving through forests that remain. The immense ape radiation that once stretched across Africa, Europe, and Asia has contracted until only a few branches endure. Their survival is remarkable precisely because so many others vanished without descendants, leaving only scattered fossils to mark where they once lived. Across the world today, fewer than 200,000 chimpanzees remain in the wild. Bonobos number fewer than 120,000. All gorilla subspecies together account for fewer than 100,000 individuals, including only about 800 mountain gorillas. Bornean orangutans persist at roughly 100,000, though their populations continue to decline. Sumatran orangutans number only around 14,000. Behind each estimate stands an animal with its own place in a family, its own learned behaviors, and its own inheritance carried across an evolutionary history reaching back more than 23 million years. These figures represent far more than entries in a conservation report. They are the remaining threads of a lineage that once dominated the primate world with astonishing variety. During the Miocene, apes occupied forests from Western Europe to Eastern Asia, exploring ecological roles that no living ape fills today. Some specialized in fruit high within broad forest canopies. Others developed unusual forms of movement or reached sizes unmatched among modern primates. Their disappearance reduced an expansive evolutionary tapestry to only a handful of surviving forms. When a chimpanzee pauses to study its surroundings, fashions a tool from a branch, or recognizes companions after years apart, it expresses abilities refined across countless generations. Such behavior should not be mistaken for a glimpse into our own distant beginning. Chimpanzees are not preserved ancestors waiting unchanged through time. They have continued evolving along their own path for millions of years, adapting to challenges distinct from those faced by the human lineage. Their story runs beside ours, not behind it. The same truth applies to gorillas, bonobos, and orangutans. Each species represents a successful survivor of environmental upheavals that eliminated many close relatives. Their ancestors endured climatic cooling, shifting forests, changing food supplies, and repeated episodes of isolation. They reach the present after passing through evolutionary bottlenecks that countless other ape populations never crossed. Their continued existence reflects resilience rather than incompleteness. The vanished Miocene apes deserve remembrance in the same spirit. They were neither flawed experiments nor unsuccessful attempts at becoming something else. For millions of years, they flourished within environments that rewarded their bodies, diets, and social lives. Planetary changes eventually transformed those environments beyond recognition. No creature living through those ages could perceive the immense geological forces reshaping mountains, climates, and forests, much less alter their course. Our own position within this history is unlike anything that came before. We can uncover fossil bones from ancient sediments, compare them with living species, reconstruct climates from microscopic clues, and recognize recurring patterns across deep time. The record preserved in stone offers knowledge unavailable to every lineage that preceded us. It remains a rare inheritance, inviting reflection on the fragile continuity, connecting the last living apes with the many branches that came before them, and with us, their enduring relatives. After following the rise and decline of the Miocene apes across forests, mountains, islands, and changing climates, one truth settles with unusual clarity. Success in evolution has never been a permanent condition. It lasts only as long as the world continues rewarding the qualities that created it. When those conditions change, even the most accomplished lineage may find itself living in an unfamiliar age. For millions of years, the apes of the Miocene represented the greatest flowering of primate diversity the planet had ever known. Their descendants occupied 3 continents and adapted to forests that differed in climate, elevation, and seasonality. Some remained small enough to move lightly through the canopy. Others reached extraordinary size. Their bodies reflected many solutions to the challenges of arboreal life, and their expanding intelligence supported increasingly flexible ways of finding food, navigating social relationships, and raising offspring. By every measure available within their own world, they stood among the most successful mammals of their era. Yet geological history measures success differently from a single lifetime or even a million years. Across the immense span of Earth's past, abundance can fade with surprising speed. Forests that nurtured generations gradually withdrew. Climatic patterns shifted beyond familiar limits. Habitats became scattered. Entire branches of the ape family disappeared until only a small fraction remained. A few million years, immense to human imagination, forms only a brief interval within planetary history. Nothing in the fossil record suggests celebration or sorrow within these changes. The Earth records outcomes without preference. Rocks preserve monkeys and apes with equal indifference. They preserve flourishing ecosystems beside extinction horizons, using the same patient layers of sediment. Evolution itself carries no promise that complexity will always prevail, nor that intelligence guarantees continued survival. Every lineage exists within environmental circumstances that may eventually favor different qualities. This perspective offers an unexpected reflection upon intelligence itself. Large brains, extended learning, intricate social lives, and behavioral flexibility opened remarkable possibilities for the surviving ape lineages. Those same traits also depended upon stable conditions that allowed individuals many years to mature and pass knowledge across generations. When environments shifted beyond the pace those life histories could accommodate, intelligence alone could not prevent decline. Adaptability remained valuable, though it operated within biological limits that no species could escape. Humility grows naturally from such evidence. More than 100 known ape species once explored possibilities now represented by only a handful of living descendants. Their bones remind us that disappearance is not reserved for creatures lacking sophistication or ecological success. It can reach groups that seemed firmly established across continents, leaving only scattered fossils where thriving populations once moved through living forests. Humans occupy an unusual place within this continuing story. We inherit the cognitive legacy shaped during the Miocene, while also possessing the capacity to reconstruct that distant world through science. At the same time, our own activities now influence climate, habitats, and biodiversity on a planetary scale. The conditions affecting countless species increasingly bear the imprint of human decisions, linking our future with the lessons preserved in ancient stone. The Miocene leaves no prophecy, only perspective. It shows that dominance belongs to a particular moment, never to eternity. Every flourishing lineage exists within changing landscapes, and every age eventually yields to another. The fossil record invites us to recognize that enduring place within nature begins not with certainty, but with understanding. A single branch endured where so many others faded. That simple fact becomes more striking with every fossil uncovered and every evolutionary relationship reconstructed. The great diversity that once defined the ape family has narrowed until only a small collection of living species remains, and among them one has spread farther than any primate before it, reshaping landscapes, oceans, and even the space beyond Earth. From the fossil record, at least 100 Miocene ape species are known, and that number almost certainly falls short of the true total. Today, only about 20 living ape species remain, depending upon how closely related populations are classified. Among those survivors, humanity alone numbers around 8 billion individuals. No other ape has approached such abundance. No other has built cities, preserved knowledge in libraries, painted ceilings, composed symphonies, mapped the deoxyribonucleic acid molecule, or sent robotic explorers toward distant planets. Every achievement rests upon the continuation of a single lineage that escaped the wider collapse experienced by its relatives. That continuation was never guaranteed. Evolution offers possibilities, never promises. Had forests in eastern Africa contracted along a different pattern, had isolated populations disappeared before upright walking became established, or had changing climates pressed slightly harder upon one vulnerable branch, the story would have reached another ending. Countless extinct ape species testify that disappearance was the ordinary outcome. Continued survival belonged to only a few. Seen from this perspective, humanity represents more than another successful species. We are the remainder of a genuine extinction event that transformed the history of primates. The Miocene decline removed most ape diversity from the planet, leaving scattered survivors to inherit ecosystems profoundly different from those that had once supported their ancestors. Our own lineage emerged from that diminished world, carrying forward traits shaped during millions of years that began long before the first recognizable humans appeared. Every familiar element of civilization, therefore, rests upon foundations laid within a vanished landscape. Language, engineering, music, mathematics, storytelling, scientific discovery, and memory all grew from biological capacities inherited through generations, reaching back to those forest edge populations that endured when so many others disappeared. Their survival became the condition required for everything that followed, though they could never have imagined the distant consequences of their persistence. The Miocene apes themselves possessed no awareness that they inhabited the closing chapters of an extraordinary age. They searched for fruit, formed social bonds, protected their offspring, and moved through forests that had sustained their ancestors across immense stretches of time. Climatic shifts unfolded beyond perception, gradually altering habitats until familiar patterns no longer held. Their lives continued one season after another, while the broader world transformed around them. Our position differs in one remarkable respect. We can recognize environmental change while it occurs. Geological records, fossils, atmospheric measurements, and ecological observations reveal patterns invisible to every lineage before ours. We understand that climates change, that habitats fragment, and that biodiversity can contract with lasting consequences. Knowledge itself has become part of our evolutionary inheritance. Whether knowledge alone proves sufficient remains uncertain. The fossil record offers no assurance that understanding inevitably becomes wisdom. It does, however, provide perspective unlike any other source. Within the surviving branch of an ancient family, we possess the rare ability to remember relatives known only through stone, to recognize how improbable our own existence truly is, and to carry that awareness into whatever chapter follows. Night settles across the Congo basin, and high above the forest floor, a chimpanzee folds living branches into a sleeping nest. Leaves curve inward beneath careful hands, creating a resting place that will last only until morning. This small ritual has unfolded across countless generations. It belongs to the present, yet it also belongs to a lineage that once reached far beyond the horizon of the forest that shelters it now. There was a time when relatives of that sleeping ape occupied landscapes separated by thousands of miles. Forests spread across southern France. Woodlands covered valleys in what is now Hungary. Rich habitats extended through the Iberian Peninsula, across the Indian subcontinent, and into broad regions of China. Their descendants did not remain. Climate shifted, forests retreated, mountains rose, grasslands expanded, and much later humanity reshaped still more of the living world. Vineyards replaced subtropical forests, fields replaced woodland, cities covered ancient soils, coastlines changed. Millions of years carried familiar places into unfamiliar forms. What survives today is only a fraction of that earlier abundance. The remaining forests appear as scattered refuges where uninterrupted expanses once stretched across continents. Their boundaries continue to change, though the memory of their former reach endures within stone, fossil teeth, and fragments of ancient skeletons preserved beneath layers of earth. Those discoveries remind us that present landscapes represent only one brief arrangement in a much longer story. The Miocene reveals a planet where forests formed the prevailing pattern across immense regions. Apes were woven naturally into that setting. They were neither isolated nor exceptional. They diversified, adapted, and flourished through environments that rewarded climbing bodies, searching hands, and minds capable of navigating intricate social lives. Their success endured for millions of years before changing conditions gradually narrowed the world they had inherited. Modern wilderness often feels like a remnant preserved against surrounding development. Deep time offers another perspective. What now appears unusual once defined ordinary existence. Forest canopies stretched where open country stands today, and the presence of apes required no special explanation. They belonged to the everyday rhythm of life across lands that no longer resemble their former selves. Humanity stands at the far end of that remarkable history. Every bone in the human hand reflects ancestors shaped for life among branches. Every capacity for learning, cooperation, communication, invention, and imagination rests upon foundations established during millions of years of ape evolution. Within us echoes the legacy of every Dryopithecus moving through European forests, every Civipithecus searching woodland habitats across the Indian subcontinent, and every Oreopithecus navigating its island home within the ancient Mediterranean. Their worlds vanished, yet part of their inheritance continued. The Miocene, therefore, has never become merely a chapter sealed inside stone. Its influence persists wherever an ape raises its young, wherever a chimpanzee builds another evening nest, and wherever a human mind wonders how such an immense story reached the present day. The forests have changed, the continents have changed, and the family tree has narrowed almost beyond recognition. Still, one branch remains, carrying the memory of an empire that disappeared long before anyone could remember it, and carrying forward the only pages of that history that have yet to unfold.